Photoshop stitching or hand stitching? Which one will win the Photoshop stitching stitch-off? Hey guys, Jason Olsred here, the Photillustrator, and today I'm going to put Photoshop stitching to the test to see if it can outstitch me in a stitch-off. Now, by the time you finish watching this short video, you're going to know exactly what Photoshop can do with stitching versus what you can do by hand. Now, I like hand stitching way better than I like using the Photoshop's option for stitching, but I recently ran across a comment in Facebook that asked why not just use Photoshop's stitching because it's way better and way more efficient than it is doing hand stitching. And I argue that point, and that's the reason for this video today. Quick question for you. Now, if you're letting Photoshop do all your stitching and all the heavy work for you, is that still considered art? Leave a comment below and let me know, yes or no, is it art or is it not? All right, so let's start this tutorial by taking a look at the 9 different images that I use to create my composite, the Nightmare at Balfour. It's the Balfour Nightmare. All right, so we're gonna take a look at these 9 images in Lightroom so I can show you exactly what I'm looking at. Now, when I photographed the Balfour Winery, which is, it's a really cool building, but when I photographed it, I couldn't get very far away from it. And otherwise it went downhill and I'd be shooting way up at it. So I had to stand pretty close to the building, which is the reason why I had to take it in 9 different shots. So I did a sweep kind of in the middle at neutral, then one below and one up to get the angles that I have for these 9 views. And you'll see that here in Lightroom here. So this is the first image that we did, and this is, I believe this is probably the down shot, all right, that we see here. And then our middle shots here of the winery, and I'm literally backed up against a railing, so I couldn't go up any further, obviously, and I'm gonna have to take more shots. And then our upper view span there is what we have there. So those are the 9 different shots that I use for this image. Real quick, going through them and down. And that's what we're gonna test Photoshop in stitching. All right, so now that you've seen the 9 images that I use to create the Balfour Nightmare, it's time to put Photoshop to the test and see what it can do. All right, so here we are in Photoshop looking at the ways that Photoshop can stitch together an image. So looking at our first image here, which is the auto stitch, and it looks pretty good. And as you can see over here on the right here, that Photoshop puts all those images into layers and then it cuts them out. And you can see that as we click off here of each one of these, you'll see that the image disappears and how jaggedy that is. That's how Photoshop's algorithm pieces that all together, which is really, really, really cool. All right, so then going on to our next cylindrical one, stitching together, that looks pretty good. And if we look at the 2, you can see it gives a little bit more of a wonky look to it, all right, in the spherical or in the cylindrical look. And then moving on to the spherical stitch, we get a really wonky look here in that one. And that clearly just, unless you have some crazy reason to use a spherical stitching together of a scene, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how I would use it. Anyway, there that is. All right, so the collage, now we start to get into a lot of breakdown, and Photoshop doesn't stitch this part of it together very well. So there's our first limitation in Photoshop stitching, and then we go to the reposition. Clearly, I don't know what that's all about. That did not work at all. All right, so those are the few different ways, and the reposition stitching from Photoshop, it just took way too long. Also, the other problem that I had with stitching these together in Photoshop is I got a lot of Photoshop crashing on me, all right? So when I went to save an image or something to that effect, it would crash on me and I'd have to start all over, which is really, really irritating. All right, so that's the few different ways that Photoshop stitches things together. All in all, I'm pretty impressed with the way it does it, especially here on auto. I think that's probably my favorite, and we'll compare auto to my image the Belfour Nightmare and see how they compare here in just a few minutes. Alrighty, so now that we know what Photoshop can do, what it's capable of, which is cool, let's strip my composite down. Let's strip my composite, the Belfour Nightmare, down to the basics and take a look at the hand stitching of that background. All right, so here we are back in Photoshop and we're looking here at the Belfour Nightmare image that I created. Now, when I've already gone through and I've already deleted all the main ingredients so we could dig into the background here and really take a look at the background and compare my hand stitched background to the stitching of Photoshop. All right, so we click off of that and here is my background. We could even further get rid of the trees in the background and the sky, but that's not even fun. Let's keep those in there. I've already dragged the image from Photoshop stitching over into this image so we could take a look at it. And this is the comparison, all right? So all in all, I'm not too unimpressed. I think it's pretty good. You know, the only problem is how you see that these parts of the building here are kind of looming over. And I really wanted to give the building, because it's haunted and that type of thing, but I want to kind of give it a looming over my character's kind of vibe to it or feel to it. And so to do that, there was a lot of, you know, cutting up and stitching together of that image to get that look, all right? So then when we look at the Photoshop stitch, it's not there. You don't get that feeling. You don't get that same feeling like the building is just kind of looming over the character. So, you know, as great as this is, you still would have to go in and do a lot of hand work on this to get it to look the way I do in the original Belfour Nightmare and that kind of looming feeling to it. So that's the difference. It's good, but it's not great. It's good, all right? Photoshop did a good job, but it doesn't compare to hand stitching, in my opinion. All right, so there you have it. Photoshop stitching versus hand stitching. Which one do you like better? Leave it in the comment below. Leave your answer in the comments below and let me know. All right, so before you go, don't forget, subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up. If you want to follow me on Instagram, that's @Photillustrator. On Facebook, @Photillustrator. Join our Facebook group at Photillustrator Masters, and definitely check out my premium compositing tutorials at Photillustrator.com under the photographer section. All right, guys, that's it for this video tutorial. And until next time, let's get this and go make some awesome pictures.